Good day. Welcome to Peterborough Matters. My name is Paul Rellinger, and my guest is Mayor Diane Therrien. First of all, as we ask every time during these crazy pandemic times, how are you doing? How was your week?
Uh, it was, I'm doing well. Yeah, it was a busy week. The weekend was nice weather, so had a little bit of downtime, which was good. Yeah, how about yourself?
Very good. You're right about the downtime thing. It seems when you have a little more time on your hands than you normally would, although I know that's not the case for you, you find ways to fill the time. And I'm amazed at how quick the week goes when I really didn't think that would be the case. But
Yeah.
uh, lots to talk about today. Always something going on in the city of Peterborough. I wanted to talk start, if we could. I know Council has approved a formation of the Community Recovery and Resilience Task Force. Tell us a little bit about that group, what its mandate is, and why it's important that we have something like this.
Sure. So, as you know, there has been previously struck the Warden and Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force. And that is something that, is between the city and the county and looking at, working with Peterborough and the Kawarthas economic development. And so that's a separate entity from this. There's been a lot of impacts aside from the economic impacts, obviously, throughout this pandemic. So, folks, we've had this pandemic emergency happening for, since March now, but we've also still continued to have issues around housing, around opioids, around a host of other issues that the community's been dealing with, and we need to make sure we don't lose sight of those as well. So the Community Recovery and Resilience Task Force looks at some of that. It also has a broader scope to sort of look at, aside from the economic piece, as we're rebuilding and recovering from COVID, how can we make sure we're doing it in the most resilient and sustainable way? So there'll be representatives on there from, the arts and culture community, from the environmental piece, to look at what might we be able to implement new sustainability policies, what are the opportunities that we can take from this crisis as we transition to this new normal that we keep hearing about. So it's just sort of getting up and running. It was just given council approval last night, so the next steps for me are reaching out to folks from those different sectors. So like I had mentioned, arts and culture, social services, housing and homelessness, the urban indigenous community. It's meant to be more of a holistic committee that will, and there are committees that other communities are doing across the province that are sort of similar.
Mhm.
So they're looking at not just the economic and the financial, but also like the human, toll and well-being, and the environmental piece. So that's, that's the goal of that task force. And I know there's a lot of excitement around it. I've had several emails from different folks that want to sit around that table and have some really great ideas. So, again, we're coming out of this crisis, learning a lot every week. We're reopening and figuring out what things are going to look like for the next couple of weeks, and things change really rapidly.
Yeah.
But out of that, we do have some opportunities to learn lessons and best practices and figure out how we might be able to change things, and move things in a positive direction. I know we're going to talk about, for example, transit later on in the program, but out of one of the opportunities that we've seen come through for COVID is that we're able to adapt things very quickly, more quickly than normally, governments
Yeah.
sometimes work.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is, bringing together some of those really passionate folks that have really great ideas about how we can, build back our community coming out of this.
And you raise a very good point, and we can't lose sight of it that other stuff doesn't go away. I mean, COVID has been a major roadblock, obviously, in so many different ways, but things are still ongoing that were ongoing before this, and were ongoing
Yeah.
last year, and you can't lose sight of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've lost more people to opioid overdoses than we have to COVID in the last couple of months. So, it we can't, again, yeah, you're right, we can't lose sight of those other issues because they're still going on regardless of whether restaurants are open or not.
Mhm.
And in fact, some things are exacerbated. We know that mental health and addictions issues have been in many cases exacerbated by the isolation and the loneliness and the disruption that has been a result of the pandemic. So very cognizant of that, and just yeah, making sure that we're trying to deal with all of these major issues.
As you're well aware, we've been in phase two, stage two of the province's recovery plan for a little bit now, and that's continuing. It would be totally unfair for me to ask you for a timeline regarding phase three because obviously it's out of your control. It's provincially mandated. But having said that, I know municipal governments, all governments look ahead. They work ahead. Um, can you give us some idea what kind of considerations might be taken for phase three in terms of things that you could be looking at opening in that particular stage?
Yeah, and I mean, under the provincial framework, stage three talks about, reopening most remaining businesses. In the framework that the province has put out, phase one is protect and support. Phase two, which our region is in, is restart. And then phase three is recover. And so that, again, uh, involves ensuring the health and safety of the public and employees as we transition to this new normals. So from the city's perspective, there are things that are sort of outside of our jurisdiction that'll happen in phase three. So reopening of a lot of businesses, as you know, we've been involved with in phase two, trying to help particularly downtown establishments figure out how to have more space for customers, which is part of why you see some of those changes downtown
Yep.
recently. But phase three will involve, yeah, reopening of municipal facilities, so arenas, those types of things. Again, our direction largely comes from the province and the health unit. So if we do move to phase three, within the next couple of weeks, does that then mean that slow pitch leagues can play for part of July and August? Does that mean that hockey arenas and leagues are able to go back to normal? Probably not. Playgrounds are something that the city will be reopening in phase three. So we just reopened our splash pads as part of phase two. But a little bit different. We took out any equipment that required a hand touch to operate. So trying to limit those points of contact. And yeah, so phase three, a lot of it though is like, the interior of restaurants. Right now they're only able to serve outside, but the interior, that's sort of out of our control.
Yep.
So our emergency control group, which as you know, meets Wednesday mornings, is always thinking about what's coming down next. But again, it's we're all figuring it out as we go. The province is keeping track of those numbers, and and hopefully we can move to phase three. But again, making sure that we're still practicing physical distancing and being smart and being courteous.
And surely one of the determining factors with how much you can do in phase three will be the province possibly raising that number of people that can get together. I mean,
Yeah,
that's gonna determine a lot of things because I think right now it's a certain number for weddings, funeral receptions, and and for people's bubbles, so to speak. But that may raise, and that could be a game changer in terms of what you can do in terms of opening some of these services.
yeah, absolutely. So again, yeah, we go by their direction, and it might be that we can open, but at 50% capacity, maybe not that. It's, we listen to the experts in the medical field as well to help make sure that we're able to control the risk of a reemergence.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the patio reopenings, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but because I know much has been talked about road closures and the effect, and a little bit of pushback on that. Where are we at right now? I understand there's a new plan that's just slowly being implemented that sort of speaks to the concerns of pretty much all involved at this point?
Yeah, so the plan that you'll see that's being implemented now, and if you've been downtown in the last couple of days, you'll notice that there's been a lot of bollards erected, new ramps put in. So the idea is not only to facilitate additional space for patios for restaurants that can't currently have patrons inside, but also to enable customers to properly physically distance when they are coming down to shop at any restaurant, or sorry, at any establishment. And so we've taken some, some parking. There still is parking available downtown, and the sidewalks are sort of meant to be it's basically extra square footage for retail establishments, as well as potential patio space for a lot of the restaurants. And then the bollards that you see delineate what is now sort of the pedestrian area. And so, there's been some people saying, well, you should just do pop-up patios for those restaurants that are there. The city needs to make sure that everything is compliant with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act. Moreover, it's not just about those restaurants that might want a patio, but it's also about making sure there's enough space for customers that are going into those retail shops, because a lot of them do have, I was at Flavor Fashion over the weekend, they have a limit of, I think it's 4 or 5 customers in the store at the time. And then you don't want to have 10 people crammed together waiting on the sidewalk. So we're providing more space for pedestrians. I know that people are always apprehensive about change. It's important to realize this is the first week that this has really been implemented. And staff worked very closely with the DBIA on this pilot. So I think people just need to be a little bit patient. We really want people to be coming back to the downtown area, and having that space to be able to do so safely is really important.
You're watching Peterborough Matters here on your TV. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about some non-COVID related stuff for a bit. So please join us in a few moments. We're back on Peterborough Matters. I'm joined by Mayor Diane Therrien. A couple of non-COVID related, and there are non-COVID.
I know, yeah.
Right? So, it's nice to kind of change it up a little bit. After months of uncertainty, an interesting development, I think a good one, the Peterborough Farmers Market has opened again.
It's been around, well, that's been a problem longer than COVID.
Yeah, it's been a while. And a lot of stuff was happening around the market, as you're well aware, over the last year and a half. But now, correct me if I'm wrong, I understand there's some new folks at the helm in board positions. It has opened. I think, especially during this particular time, a pretty positive development for the city. That market is near and dear to so many people's hearts.
Yeah, for sure. And it is an issue that's, since I was a counselor, there's been drama there. So, it's a bit tiring, but it is. I love all the markets in town, and I think that they're back up and running as such. I hope that the drama is done with, because that was something that should have kind of never gone the way, and it didn't need to go the way that it did. And so, yeah, I mean, I haven't had a lot to do with the reestablishment of this market at Morrow Park, aside from signing the land use agreement. So hopefully it goes well. I saw pictures the weekend. It looked like it went well. They had, there was a plant vendor there I might need to go see this weekend. So yeah, but I mean, it's a markets are a cornerstone of community. There's social, space for people, particularly in the day and age that we're in, with so much, uncertainty and isolation, that I know a lot of folks are really, relish being able to go and run into some neighbors and some people. Again, I have heard some concerns about folks and not that market in particular, but markets in general, that aren't, wearing masks and aren't necessarily practicing physical distancing. So would just encourage people to be sure to do that. I think a lot of the vendors have been really proactive at taking steps to make sure that everyone I'd seen there has proper PPE on and is being very careful about handling any money.
Yeah.
But it is our responsibility as patrons of those markets to be, to practice that safe behavior, not just for ourselves and those around us, but for those vendors, because they need to be able to, physically do the demanding jobs that they have to do as well.
And it's great that you mentioned that about what people need to do, especially not only the people running the markets, but the people visiting them. We were at the new market. Actually, there's a new market at the Trent Winds property.
Okay,
Down
yeah, I've heard
there.
about that. I haven't been out there yet.
Yeah, yeah, and I was very, very impressed for one about the measures they had in place, and
Mm.
they were really, really careful to make sure people keep distance. So that was encouraging. But yeah, again, you raise a good point. I think during this particular time, markets are almost like comfort food.
Yeah, and it
That
is
we need.
hard to, I've been guilty of it too, where it's like, you see people and it's the summer, and you see people and you want to go give them a big hug. And then it's like, oh, wait, we're not supposed to do that right now. So I know that it's hard to, to break that sort of what is a basic instinct. But just trying to be conscious of the fact that, it's great that those things are up and operating and that we're able to have that community social piece while also supporting our local economy. But we want to make sure that keeps going. So we still need to be practicing, our doing our part to make sure that can continue to happen.
A really big item in the news over the last few weeks, and we're kind of coming towards when that will be implemented, is the new city transit system, routing system. Major changes are, I mean, when you talk about an overhaul, this is about as big as it gets.
Hmm.
Uh, just some background, some of those changes are designed with keeping congestion at the terminal downtown to a minimum, which is obviously a COVID-related measure. A little bit of pushback, particularly from Councillor Keith Riel at Council, had some concerns about the process leading up to this new system coming in. Can you speak to that? I guess his concerns were around consultation and who needs to be notified, and were the public notified, or were councillors notified? Where are you at on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things there. It's important to remember that, under a state of emergency, we have empowered staff to make some decisions that might otherwise normally come through the council process. It's also important to note that public consultation looks very different right now than it would have a year ago. And we're figuring out how best to do that. In addition, there have been several studies and there has been months of consultation around transit systems and usage that have been going on, since I've been in the seat that I'm in. And so there's been a lot of talk about that for a long time. So it's not totally out of left field. I've been an advocate of moving away from the hub and spoke system since even before I was on council. And so again, this is an example of how things can happen quite quickly under a state of emergency when when we really do need to figure out how to do things in a better way. Again, I know that change isn't always, it can be scary, it can be daunting. So that all that to say, I understand where Councillor Riel is coming from. Certainly myself, the co-chairs of transportation had a very fulsome update from our manager of transit. Lori Stratton and her team have put a lot of work into redesigning some of these routes to make sure that, again, people aren't all congregating at the downtown terminal because of the way that the hub and spoke system works. You'd have, 200 people gathered on a, 20-yard platform, not ideal for social or physical distancing.
Mhm.
So moving to more of a linear system with different transfer points across the city. There's some folks, in certain suburban neighborhoods that don't want to see buses come through. Our buses don't run that super frequently. It's not like the TTC, they're not coming through every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just, that change piece is always difficult. Certainly the communications piece is something that we're working on, and something that we're always trying to get better at. So, once this new route system and these changes have been finalized, we are, we've started to get the word out there. I know that myself and a couple of the other councillors, Councillor Vassiliadis and Acapo as chairs of transportation, are going to be doing, some videos to try to highlight those changes, get it out in the newspaper, get it out through venues like this so that people know. The maps are all up. The maps are all up on the website of the new routes for people to have an understanding of what that's going to look like. Basically, aside from making sure that we didn't have everybody congregating at the downtown terminal, also wanted to make sure that the bus, like if you've ever seen the Trent Express, we can't have a bus that's packed like sardines. So and when they leave the terminal, often they are. Sometimes people will see them mid or later in the route when people have gotten off and think that they're underused. But in reality, the transit system is highly used. So, having more buses on those really high traffic routes so that we can have people be able to be properly spaced, that our drivers can have adequate protection. We're working on getting bio shields on all the buses, which is basically that kind of plastic barrier between the driver and the passengers.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to start collecting fares again, which won't happen for, I believe, another month or so, because again, we don't want that transfer of money to be happening. So there's a lot of changes there for sure. We've had a lot of feedback, both good and bad. I mean, again, I would ask people to just keep an open mind, give it a couple of weeks. If it's not working, our transit team, myself, council is more than happy to hear feedback about how we can improve it, particularly from folks that are using the transit system. And so I think, and again, there's some routes it might take people longer to get somewhere. But again, the goal of this and the rationale behind it was around how do we make sure people are safe, our drivers, our passengers, because public transit is an essential service and we need to be providing it, and we need to make sure that people can use it without fear.
Oh, indeed, it's something we'll have to watch. And as you said, the city is always watching, and if measures need to be taken to make modifications, I'm sure they will be. I wanted to also talk about there's a growing call, a growing push movement for the federal government to take the CERB payments, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and transform that into some sort of guaranteed basic income for people who qualify moving forward. This has been talked about for a long time. In fact, the provincial government, as you're aware, launched a pilot project, the then Liberal government in Lindsay, to that effect. But the plug was pulled on that by the Conservatives when they came into power. Now the pleas being made to the federal government. Your thoughts on the push for this? Feasible, something that you would get, back in some way?
Yeah, again, when we're talking about big changes, certainly a UBI seems like it would be a big change. I mean, I think it is feasible. There's other countries that have similar sort of programs that are similar in idea. Regulated federally would have the advantage of streamlining that process, and then you wouldn't have the different provincial Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Program, if that was all streamlined through a UBI. The CERB is currently, double basically what folks on OW or ODSP are making, if not more. So, there is something to be said about that as well, that, that $2,000 was seen as what folks need to live on, but we know that people that are on social assistance or on, seniors pensions are not getting that amount of money. So, people hear that number and they hear UBI and they think, that it's going to cost so much money. How are you going to pay for it? But the reality is, studies have shown that it does save money in the long term. There are then employees that need to be redeployed out of those offices where they're doing social assistance and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But we've also heard a lot of the positives from it, particularly from our neighbors in Kawartha Lakes. Down in Hamilton was one of the other pilot sites. So, it's about, providing people with a bit of an equal footing. And one of the interesting things about the argument around UBI is that you can find studies from people from all different political backgrounds. Like, people think it's an NDP, left-wing thing, which those of us that sort of sit on that side or have been a big proponent of. But there's been really staunch conservatives that have said, like, yeah, this makes sense. It's economically, it makes sense, and it will save you money. So there is sort of consensus across the political spectrum that this is something that does make sense economically, as well as our social responsibility to take care of the most vulnerable.
Well, as we come out of COVID-19, and we will come out of it, we're going to see many, many changes, and that's potentially one. You've been
Absolutely.
watching Peterborough Matters here on your TV. My guest, as always, has been Mayor Diane Therrien. Thank you so much, Diane, and please continue to stay safe.
Thanks, you too, Paul.